I just don't want to talk about the Kings. Please do not make me talk about the Kings anymore. And given how much time I've spent on them throughout the course of this podcast, you might mistake me for a Kings fan, but that just really isn't the case. A supporter, maybe. I started watching basketball during the Kings' heyday when they had Weber. So I remember how fun and entertaining that Lakers Kings rivalry was. And so maybe that's why I want them to kind of be back in the fold. Or, maybe it's the fact that this is kind of under the radar, become one of the least competently run franchises in all of professional sports. I think only the Seattle Mariners have had a longer playoff drought. I think there's this since like 2001, which is far more excusable since for like 10 years of that, only 8 of 30 teams made the playoffs in baseball. Then they moved it to 10. And I think starting this year, it's going to be 12. That's far less than the 16 that make the NBA playoffs, and now 20 if you want to count the play in. And I really don't know what is more astonishing, the fact that the Spurs were able to rattle off 22 playoff appearances consecutively, or that the Kings haven't even found a way to somehow sneak in there by complete accident since 2006. I mean, the Detroit Lions have made the playoffs 3 times since the last time the Kings have made the playoffs. That's just insane. So, is this the year? Is this going to be the year that they finally make the playoffs or at least the play in? Well, according to DraftKings, no, they're slotted to be the 11th seed out west at 33 and a half wins. So, that would mean once again, they would just miss out on the play in. And just for the record, I would take the over on that. This is a pretty solid team that I think could probably finish at or around 40 wins. As far as making the play-in goes, I think it's pretty unlikely again this year. Just looking at the over-unders, they're going to be kind of competing with the Blazers, the Pelicans, the Lakers, the Timberwolves, and the Mavericks for that play-in, like kind of 6 seed in that area. That those are the teams they're going to be up against. And the good news there is they would only have to finish above one of those teams to make the play-in, and all of the teams that are kind of lower than them as far as the over under goes are so obviously tanking that they're not going to be in the mix for anything. But the bad news is at full strength, all of those teams that I just mentioned are just undoubtedly more talented than the Sacramento Kings. So they're going to need some help from those other franchises, be it injuries or in the case of the Lakers, just general drama and dysfunction in order for them to sneak into that 10th spot out west. I won't get into the strange and baffling moves that they made last season. If you do want more on that, I did like an off-season preview on them, and then earlier in the year when they fired Luke Walton, I also did another podcast. But just to kind of summarize, if you haven't been paying attention to the Sacramento Kings, and honestly, who could blame you? The past few years have been weird. It's been this really strange quest to kind of sneak into the playoffs, or in the last few years in particular, make the play-in kind of at all costs. And they're not doing a very good job of being all in on doing that. I think they're trying to kind of rebuild on the fly here a little bit. I think they're just afraid to admit, after having been kind of rebuilding since 2006, that the most recent rebuild, kind of surrounding Marvin Bagley and De'Aaron Fox, I think they're afraid to admit that that was a failure. So now they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, kind of rebuilding while they also simultaneously push to be competitive. Here's just a few examples of what I mean from like the last couple of years. Harrison Barnes, a guy who's been on the team for a while now. He's a veteran with a championship pedigree, a big wing. He's sought after by contenders every trade deadline, and this has been for years, and it's been multiple teams. But the Kings are insistent that they need to hang on to him to help them win games. Then last offseason, rather than kind of continue down that path, uh, and trade the draft pick that eventually became Davion Mitchell for a player that could help them win now, they end up drafting Davion Mitchell, having already two high draft pick young point guards on the roster in De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton. So at the time, we all kind of assumed in like the NBA fandom and community is like, well, they've taken Davion Mitchell here. They're probably looking to move off of the slightly more established De'Aaron Fox. And so this is going to begin the reset on this Sacramento Kings thing. And they're going to build like around this backcourt of Davion Mitchell and Tyrese Halliburton. But instead of doing that, they traded Halliburton for a win now player in Domantas Sabonis, and that just shocked everyone this past trade deadline. And from what I remember, too, a handful of executives were also shocked. They pretty much viewed Tyrese Halliburton as untouchable, as he should have been. Okay, so now the Kings are in win now mode, right? It sure seemed that way. And this past year's draft, they luck into the number 4 pick with Jaden Ivey available in that slot, who has superstar potential, but he's not a good fit for the roster. So again, everybody kind of assumes that they're going to be trading the pick, but they decide to select the pick and they reach on Keegan Murray out of Iowa. And don't get me wrong, I like Keegan Murray. I just don't ever see him reaching like a star level. I think he eventually reaches like the quality starter, kind of like a Harrison Barnes, Kyle Kuzma level, just like a really good starter on a playoff level team. But that's eventually. And based off of the Pistons comments kind of following the draft, their phone was ringing off the hook from teams trying to then acquire Ivy at the 5th pick. So leading up until the draft, there would have been a significant amount of interest from other teams surrounding that 4th overall pick. That would have been a really good time to pick up a player who could have helped them win now and was proven, unlike Keegan Murray. So I just have no idea what this team is doing or what the goal is here. They say that it's making the play-in or the playoffs, but not all of the actions here are directed towards that goal. Selecting players in the draft who aren't really going to help you right away, and then also simultaneously trading young guys away for win now players. It's just like those two things are kind of competing against each other. As for the rest of the Kings offseason, I sort of have mixed feelings on it. On one hand, I really like the acquisitions of both Kevin Huerter and Malik Monk. Last year, the Kings had a lot of trouble getting quality minutes out of their bench guys. So it's nice to see them round out the roster with a couple of real NBA players, one of whom, in Kevin Huerter, is still really young and has been in some really tough playoff battles. But then on the other hand, I'm really confused by the decision to hire Mike Brown. And stop me if this starts to sound familiar. The Kings hire a longtime Warriors assistant with a head coaching pedigree who looked good during his time coaching the Warriors and his interim opportunities. Yeah, they pretty much just hired Luke Walton all over again, at least from a resume perspective. I guess because that worked out so well for them last time. And it's not even that I hate Mike Brown. I think he's proven himself over a really long career in the NBA to be a decent coach. I mean, he's not great, but he's not a complete disaster either. I just find it really weird given the fact that they fired a coach with basically the exact same resume less than 12 months ago. So if you're a Kings fan, don't hold your breath for the playoff berth to happen this season. And as long as they're going to continue to try to attempt to straddle the line between rebuilding and pushing the chips in for a playoff push, it may be a while yet before they make the playoffs.